The evening started like any other, quiet and familiar, but something in the air made him notice things differently. He had dropped by his friend's house to grab a book he had left behind, expecting only the casual greetings and chatter he was used to. Instead, the door opened, and there she was, his friend's mother, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Her lightly tanned skin caught the fading sunlight streaming through the doorway, subtle freckles dancing across the bridge of her nose, and her soft laugh lines framed a smile that was both warm and knowing. She wore a flowy blouse paired with jeans that complemented her curvy figure and graceful posture. He felt a flutter of something unfamiliar as their eyes met. There was a quiet confidence in her gaze, a subtle vulnerability hidden beneath it, and an effortless warmth that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. The faint scent of her perfume, a soft mix of vanilla and linen, lingered in the air as she gestured him inside. The living room, cozy and bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, seemed suddenly charged with a weight of unspoken possibilities. As they exchanged greetings, he noticed the way she moved, the slight sway of her hips, the gentle grace in her hands as she brushed stray hair behind her ear. Her hand brushed against his shoulder, seemingly accidental, but the contact sent a shiver up his spine. He tried to focus on casual conversation, commenting on his friend's absence, but his attention kept drifting to her. Every laugh she offered, every tilt of her head, felt layered with subtle meaning he couldn't fully understand yet. She handed him the book he came for, their fingers brushing lightly in the exchange. The touch was brief, but it carried an electricity that made his pulse quicken. He realized he was acutely aware of her presence, of the way her dark brown eyes seemed to observe him with quiet amusement, and the soft curve of her lips that suggested she knew far more about him than he did about himself. Even the small details, the sunlight catching the shine of her hair, the faint crinkle of her eyes when she smiled, left an impression that lingered. For a fleeting moment, the hum of normal life disappeared. The tick of the wall clock, the muffled sounds from outside, the familiar furniture, everything faded into the background. All that remained was the warmth between them, the tension that neither of them spoke aloud, and the subtle pull that hinted tonight might be unlike any other. He left the house with the book in hand, but the image of her smile, the light touch of her hand, and the quiet strength in her gaze followed him, a memory that would settle in his chest and stir a restless, forbidden curiosity. Tonight, he realized something subtle had shifted. A connection had been made, delicate, unspoken, and impossibly charged. It was a slow, quiet awakening, the kind that starts with a glance, a brush of skin, a whisper in the air, the kind that changes the ordinary into something extraordinary. After that first fleeting encounter, the young man found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just the way she looked, though her presence lingered in his mind like sunlight caught in a glass, but the subtle way she moved through her space, the quiet confidence in her gestures, and the warmth she exuded without trying. That evening, as he lingered in the living room under the pretense of small talk, a new, unfamiliar feeling began to take root. Curiosity mixed with a hint of nervous excitement. She was tidying up the kitchen, humming softly to herself, her long black hair brushing the curve of her back with each careful movement. The scent of vanilla from her perfume mingled with the lingering aroma of fresh coffee, creating a comforting yet strangely intoxicating atmosphere. He watched as she paused, her hand reaching for a dish near the edge of the counter. Their fingers brushed lightly, and for a heartbeat, the ordinary world seemed to dissolve. The warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch, and the electricity it sparked in his arm left him momentarily frozen, aware of every detail. The gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, the subtle sway of her hips, the quiet strength in her stance. Then, unexpectedly, she leaned closer and whispered something under her breath. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear, but the words sent a ripple of awareness straight to his chest. Her voice was soft, confident, and laced with a playful knowingness that made him aware of his own inexperience, and of the unspoken connection forming between them. "You're too young to know this until tonight," she said, almost teasingly, but with an undertone that made him pause. Her dark brown eyes met his, holding a warmth that was at once comforting and disarming, as though she could see the swirling thoughts in his mind without him needing to speak. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the walls closing in around the weight of the moment. He felt a pull toward her, not just curiosity, but a deep, instinctive desire to understand this enigmatic woman who could make him feel both grounded and restless at once. The brush of her fingers against his arm, the slight tilt of her head, and the delicate curve of her smile all became focal points in his awareness. Every movement she made seemed layered with intention, even in the most casual gestures, leaving him captivated, yet hesitant to fully acknowledge the stirrings within him. Their conversation remained light, yet the silence between words carried an intimacy that made the seconds stretch. The subtle tension built naturally, the unspoken understanding that something more was simmering just beneath the surface. He noticed the way her lips curved in subtle amusement at his every careful word, the way her eyes crinkled in soft laughter, and the gentle warmth radiating from her as she moved closer to retrieve another book. Even the mundane act of standing near her became charged, her presence commanding attention without demanding it, drawing him in, and leaving him suspended in a quiet, thrilling tension. By the time he left, his mind replayed every whispered word, every touch, every glance. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and the evening had planted a seed of anticipation, curiosity, and subtle desire, one that would continue to grow quietly between them. He realized he had crossed a threshold. Tonight, a shared secret had formed, unspoken yet undeniably present, and the slow, delicate pull toward her was only beginning. The days after that evening felt different, though nothing outwardly had changed. He found himself noticing her in ways he hadn't before. The curve of her neck as she reached for something on a shelf, the subtle glint in her dark brown eyes when she smiled knowingly, the soft cadence of her voice when she spoke. Every glance they shared now lingered a moment too long, carrying with it a quiet electricity that neither dared to name aloud. It was as if the air around them had grown heavier, charged with the silent pulse of unspoken emotion. One afternoon, while helping her carry groceries into the kitchen, their hands brushed accidentally again. The contact was fleeting, but this time he didn't pull away. He felt the warmth of her skin linger in his memory, the soft strength of her fingers, the gentle pressure of her touch as she steadied a bag. His heart thumped audibly, and he realized with a mixture of wonder and anxiety that his awareness of her presence, her movements, the subtle sway of her posture, had become acute. He found himself conscious not just of her beauty, but of the quiet authority in her confidence, and the softness in the way she allowed herself to move around him without pretense. Their conversations, once casual, had begun to carry an unspoken intimacy. He noticed the way her lips curved at his jokes, the subtle tilt of her head, and the small sparkle in her eyes when she caught him looking. Even when she wasn't speaking directly to him, he felt their proximity like a magnetic pull. Every time she adjusted a strand of her long black hair or leaned slightly closer, his attention sharpened. He realized that he was beginning to crave these small interactions, the accidental touches, the shared silences that carried more weight than words ever could. One evening, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring in through the window, illuminating the subtle lines of her face and the soft glow of her skin. Her fingers brushed the edge of his sleeve as she passed him a glass of water, and he felt a jolt of awareness shoot up his arm. The warmth of her hand, the light pressure of her touch, and the intimacy of the moment made the room feel suspended, as if the world outside had paused. His pulse raced, and he found himself stealing glances at her, noticing the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, and the graceful way she moved her hands as she spoke. There was an undeniable tension between them now, subtle, quiet, and thrilling. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a magnetic pull that made each glance feel loaded with meaning. He longed to ask questions he didn't know how to voice, to bridge the invisible space between them. Yet he hesitated, aware of the boundaries and the delicate nature of what was unfolding. Every shared look, every brush of fingers, every lingering smile became a small thrill, building the slow-burning tension that had begun to take root. By the end of the evening, as she excused herself to attend to other chores, he found himself watching her with a mixture of admiration, desire, and a quiet hesitation. The simple act of her presence, the way she moved, and the silent electricity that seemed to cling to her had left an indelible mark on him. He realized that the bond between them was deepening, that the tension was no longer accidental but intentional in its subtlety, and that the slow, intoxicating pull of their connection was becoming impossible to ignore. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of traffic outside to fill the space. He sat across from her on the couch, his hands clasped loosely in his lap, feeling an unexpected nervousness that he couldn't quite name. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair had a presence that was at once calming and electrifying. Her lightly tanned skin glowed softly in the warm lamplight, and the subtle freckles across her nose seemed almost to smile at him, inviting a closeness that words alone could not create. She was dressed in a cozy knit sweater and dark jeans, her curvy figure and graceful posture radiating a quiet confidence. Yet there was a softness in her expression that made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the kind that carried the weight of unsaid thoughts and feelings. Then, in a voice that was both soft and deliberate, she began to speak, sharing a story from her own past, moments of vulnerability that she rarely revealed to anyone. He noticed the way her fingers traced the edge of her sweater, the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as she exhaled, and the way her dark brown eyes seemed to shimmer with memory. Her words weren't just stories. They were invitations to understand her, to step beyond superficiality and glimpse the heart behind the grace. He leaned slightly forward, drawn by the warmth in her voice and the sincerity in her eyes. The quiet lamplight illuminated the subtle lines around her eyes, the soft smile that lingered even when she recounted difficult moments, and the gentle strength in the curve of her lips. He felt a stirring in his chest, admiration, empathy, and something more tender that he didn't yet have the words for. There was an intimacy in sharing vulnerabilities, in watching someone reveal their inner world, and he realized he had never felt this deeply connected to anyone before. As she spoke, her hand brushed lightly against his, a gesture that felt accidental but carried with it the weight of intention. The warmth of her skin, the brief pressure of her fingers, and the comforting rhythm of her heartbeat resonated through him. He noticed the small details, the slight tilt of her head as she spoke, the soft curl of her hair falling over her shoulder, the way her body leaned subtly toward his without breaking any boundaries. The room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the quiet intimacy of shared stories and lingering glances. Every word she shared drew him closer, not just physically but emotionally. He found himself opening in ways he hadn't anticipated, responding with quiet attentiveness, subtle nods, and carefully chosen words that reflected his growing understanding. The tension between them was still present, but now it was layered with emotional depth, a slow, deliberate burn that intertwined admiration, trust, and the quiet thrill of connection. By the time the conversation waned, he felt a sense of closeness that was new and disarming. She rested her hand lightly on his for a moment longer than necessary, her dark brown eyes holding his with gentle warmth, and he felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his own awareness. Tonight, the bond between them had deepened, not through grand gestures, but through subtle touches, whispered confidences, and the slow building of trust. The room, bathed in warm light, had become a haven for this quiet, intimate connection, and he knew that the path ahead was delicate, charged, and undeniably compelling. The tension between them had grown quietly but unmistakably over the past days. Tonight, it felt almost tangible, like the air itself was charged with unspoken emotion. They were sitting near each other on the couch, the warm lamplight casting soft shadows across her face. The 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, and subtle freckles had an aura that was both commanding and inviting. Her curvy figure leaned just slightly toward him, and the soft rise and fall of her chest in the calm evening air seemed to echo in his own heartbeat. Every detail, the gentle crinkle of her eyes when she smiled, the delicate tilt of her head, the faint shimmer in her dark brown eyes, was magnified in his awareness. As they talked about inconsequential things, the conversation itself became secondary to the quiet electricity in the room. His attention was drawn to her hands, the way they moved with grace as she adjusted a cushion, the brief, almost accidental brush of her fingers against his arm. The contact was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet it left him acutely aware of the warmth and softness of her skin. A shiver ran down his spine, and he had to focus on steadying his breathing, realizing that his awareness of her presence, her touch, her scent, had grown intense in a way he hadn't anticipated. Then, in a moment suspended between laughter and silence, her hand paused on his arm, fingertips grazing lightly. The sensation was electric, but subtle, charged with meaning without a single word being spoken. He felt the warmth radiating from her skin, the quiet steadiness of her hand, and the flutter of his own pulse. She didn't pull away, and neither did he, both aware of the fragile line they were walking, a line drawn between curiosity, desire, and respect. The room seemed smaller now, the golden light wrapping them in a cocoon of intimacy. His gaze traveled to the curve of her neck, the graceful slope of her shoulders, the subtle sway of her posture as she shifted closer, just enough for him to sense her presence more keenly. The small space between them became heavy with anticipation, each movement, glance, and breath loaded with emotion. His mind raced, simultaneously aware of boundaries, yet fascinated by the thrill of the unspoken connection. Her soft laughter filled the room, warm and genuine, and yet beneath it was a hint of something unspoken, an invitation to step closer, emotionally and physically, if only he dared. He realized how deeply he was drawn to her, not just for her physical presence, but for the emotional gravity she carried. Every subtle smile, every lingering glance, every brush of her fingers was a reminder of the slow-burning tension that had been building since the first accidental touch. It was a tension rooted in admiration, curiosity, and desire, a complicated, deliciously dangerous mix that made his pulse quicken and his thoughts whirl. As the evening drew on, the electricity between them remained unspoken yet undeniable. The warmth of her hand, the proximity of their bodies, the intimacy of shared silence, all of it coalesced into a moment that teetered on the edge of possibility. Tonight, he realized, the slow burn of their connection had reached its peak, a delicate, thrilling balance between restraint and longing. The night held a promise of closeness yet to come, and neither of them could ignore it. After the heightened tension of previous days, tonight brought a gentle, comforting intimacy that felt like a quiet reward. They sat together on the couch, the warm lamplight casting a soft golden glow across the room. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, and subtle freckles leaned slightly toward him, her curvy figure and graceful posture exuding a calm confidence that made the space feel safe yet charged with subtle energy. Her dark brown eyes met his with warmth, and the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes deepened, giving her face a tenderness he hadn't fully noticed before. He found himself noticing the smallest details, the way her long black hair fell across her shoulder, the soft rustle of fabric as she shifted closer, the faint perfume lingering in the air, vanilla and linen blending in a way that made the room feel both familiar and intimate. Their hands brushed, lightly at first, then with more awareness. When their fingers intertwined, the warmth of her palm against his, the gentle squeeze, and the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat created a sense of connection that was both grounding and thrilling. It was a closeness born not of words, but of presence, each gesture carrying layers of meaning that neither needed to voice. They spoke softly, in low tones that seemed to belong only to the room. The conversation was gentle, almost mundane, a comment about the weather, a shared memory of his friend, but beneath the words lay a subtle current of trust and emotional intimacy. He realized that he could simply be near her, feel her presence, and understand a depth of connection he hadn't anticipated. Each glance, each slight movement, seemed loaded with significance. The way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the tilt of her head as she listened, the small, reassuring smile she offered. At one point, she rested her head briefly on his shoulder, her long black hair brushing the side of his arm. He felt the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth radiating from her body, and the quiet comfort of her presence. There was no rush, no urgency, only a shared moment of stillness, a fragile but profound emotional bond. He found himself leaning slightly closer, not wanting to break the quiet intimacy, aware that this slow, deliberate closeness was more powerful than anything hurried or overt could be. The evening light painted the room in shades of gold, illuminating the curve of her smile, the soft sparkle in her eyes, and the graceful lines of her hands as they rested together. He became conscious of the subtle rhythm between them, the brushing of fingers, the warmth of a hand lingering, the gentle exchange of glances that said more than words ever could. There was a sense of safety and trust here, a quiet understanding that their connection was both delicate and deeply real. By the time the night deepened, the intimacy had settled into a comforting warmth. Their hands remained close, occasionally brushing, sometimes clasped, each touch reinforcing the silent acknowledgement of their bond. He realized that this quiet resolution, this shared space of calm and gentle affection, was as thrilling and profound as any dramatic gesture. The slow burn of their relationship had blossomed into something tangible, emotionally rich, and beautifully restrained, leaving both of them quietly transformed. The night had deepened into a gentle quiet, the kind that made the world outside seem distant and insignificant. They sat together in the living room, the warm glow from the lamp softening the edges of everything, casting a comforting hue over the space. The 40-year-old American Latino woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, and subtle freckles looked at him with a calm, confident warmth. Her dark brown eyes, framed by soft smile lines, conveyed understanding, care, and a quiet pride in the bond that had formed between them. She wore a soft knit sweater and dark jeans, her curvy figure poised with natural grace. The long black hair cascading down her back in smooth waves that caught the light as she moved. Tonight, there was no rush, no pressing need to define or explain anything. Their hands rested near each other, fingertips brushing occasionally, warm contact a silent acknowledgement of the intimacy they shared. He felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat through the subtle pressure of her hand against his, the warmth of her presence enveloping him in a way that words could never fully capture. It was a quiet, steady intimacy, a culmination of the slow, deliberate moments they had shared, the whispers, the lingering touches, the small gestures that had gradually drawn them closer. They exchanged soft words, not about grand declarations, but about ordinary things, a favorite book, a shared memory of his friend, the hum of life that moved steadily outside the walls of the house. Each exchange was layered with meaning, each glance a testament to the depth of connection they had built. He noticed the slight tilt of her head, the curve of her lips, the subtle lift of her eyebrows as she listened intently. Every detail was heightened, each small gesture magnified by the quiet intimacy of the night. At one point, she leaned slightly toward him, her head brushing gently against his shoulder. He felt the softness of her hair, the warmth of her body, and the slow, steady pulse of her presence. The moment was simple, yet it carried the weight of all the previous days, The accidental touches, the whispered words, the lingering glances. He realized that the bond they shared was not just emotional, but deeply human, built on trust, understanding, and a subtle, mutual affection that needed no grand gestures to be meaningful. As the night drew on, they rose slowly, hands lingering near each other, even as she prepared to leave. The brief hug that followed was soft, lingering, and full of unspoken emotion. Her hand remained near his, fingertips brushing lightly, conveying a quiet reassurance. He watched her walk toward the door, long black hair swaying, the evening light catching her curves and casting a soft glow on her tan skin. He felt a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and a deep warmth that stayed with him long after she left the room. By the time the door closed, the connection between them had reached a full, satisfying resolution. The tension that had once crackled subtly between them had softened into a warm, enduring intimacy. He understood that this slow, careful bond, built on moments of trust, affection, and quiet vulnerability, was rare and precious. The night had transformed them both, leaving them quietly changed, aware of the depth of what they shared, and certain that their connection would remain a cherished, unspoken treasure.